The content of this podcast has not been evaluated by Health Canada or the FDA. It is educational in nature and should not be taken as medical advice. Always consult a qualified medical professional to see if a diet, lifestyle change, or supplement is right for you. Any supplements mentioned are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Please note that the opinions of the guests or hosts are their own and may not reflect those of Advanced Orthomolecular Research Incorporated. Welcome to Supplementing Health, a podcast presented by Advanced Orthomolecular Research. We are all about applying evidence-based and effective dietary, lifestyle, and natural health product strategies for your optimal health. In each episode, we will feature very engaging clinicians and experts from the world of functional and naturopathic medicine to help achieve our mission to empower people to live their best lives naturally. Stop worrying about your vein health. Instead, look for AOR's Veinies at your local retailer or online at aor.ca. This unique formula combines a clinically tested combination and ratio of deosmin and hesperidin with grapeseed extract to promote healthy vein function and reduce the risk of chronic vein insufficiency, or CVI. Don't delay, get yours today. Welcome back to Supplementing Health. I'm so happy to have you all tuning in today. A fun fact about me is I'm a huge yoga lover. However, I'm not going to lie, when I first started on my yogi journey, I was very surprised by what an intense workout it can actually be. You know, there's this perception around yoga that it is a leisurely stretching activity, which is not the case in a serious practice. Now, that being said, stretching out has so many benefits that today I'm super excited to be joined by Christine, an avid yogi and a trained instructor who has been practicing for more than 20 years to discuss the benefits of incorporating yoga into your daily activities, particularly in this case for vascular health. Thank you so much for joining me today, Christine.
Well, thank you very much, Cassie.
So before we dive into the health benefits of yoga, would you mind sharing a bit about how you got into yoga and the history of your practice?
Absolutely. Well, I got into yoga as a dancer when I was in university. It was sort of framed to me as like doing a warm-up sun salutations and some centering work before going on stage. And I connected a lot with that. And I think I studied yoga, like a couple different kinds of yoga at that time because it wasn't really a popular thing at that point. So it was just a few people I knew that were doing it, which is strange to think of that now. But then the style of yoga that I kind of fell more into and studied a little deeper, which shape shifted a lot of things for me, was Ashtanga yoga. And I think it's changed so much and been such a diverse journey that it's not the only way I practice now. It's kind of an incorporation of a lot of different styles and movement and meditations that I've learned over the years. But Ashtanga yoga was interesting to me because it was quite a physical, practice, and I was a dancer, so it spoke to me right away. And I was also quite young and mobile, and I kind of just was very excited about the idea of like where it came from, and that the practice was known to be something that you take on for your personal growth and not necessarily something that you had to like do exactly the way other people did. And that's how it kind of was framed to me at that time. I went to India and I studied that style of practice, and it has its roots, like yoga has its roots over 5,000 years ago, but specifically this practice has gained more, insight and popularity from about the 1900s and on, and specifically in like the 60s, 70s, and 80s, it really drew in some Western students to go and study with a man called Patabi Joyce. So his teacher actually is Krishnamacharya, who claims to have learned this practice on or found this practice in a academic library in Mysore, India, where the practice was written on palm leaves, which actually are not to be found at this point anymore. So some people don't believe that's true because there's no way to go and find them and read them for ourselves at this point. But there was two sort of identifications in that style of yoga, what they were trying to pull together, which this practice of yoga therapy that kind of stemmed more from Ayurveda, the sister science to yoga, to the practice of the 8 limbs of yoga, which is what the word Ashtanga means, but it has more of its roots in sort of a more therapeutic, meditative, and spiritual alignment of practice. And the asana part didn't really flourish and expand until Krishnamacharya, I guess he studied in the Himalayan mountains in a cave with a teacher as well for years that, brought back this secret information that at that point was, taught from teacher to student. And Pattabhi Jois, and Krishnamacharya found these papers that were on palm leaves. And it stated that you should practice yoga with this concept of vinyasa, which was a breathing to movement practice, which is also what they thought was the way into practicing these 8 limbs and this deeper spiritual practice that a man or woman, they don't know, of these scriptures from 1700 years ago called the Yoga Sutras. So there's a combination, or I think they said they found both those documents at the same time and gained the insight that that's how you should practice yoga. But also, Krishnamacharya, as a teacher, was a yoga therapist, and he was known for teaching quite a few of the greats of yoga that we now know in the West, like Iyengar and his son Desikachar, and Indra Devi, which is the first female practitioner who studied with Krishnamacharya. And he was known for having a stern approach, and there's some stipulations that some of that work was also stemming from military actions of learning wrestling and gymnastics in sort of the more British reign time in India. So there's a lot of different sort of ways in which, it's been compiled and moved together since its just original form 5,000 years ago as Vedic scriptures for a practice for particularly male priests. And so it's evolved a lot. And, what I loved about reading more and studying the work of Krishnamacharya is that, there was some sternness and some directive that sounded like a lot of correlations between that military practice or development of strength to persevere in great suffering and to be as strong minded and physically as possible. And it's also noted that along the way, that was also originally intended for young boys. So it's adapted a lot over the years. And today we see these different variations of practice because Krishnamacharya was known for teaching each of his students a little bit differently. So he, like each of those more, world-renowned yoga teachers that were more responsible for spreading yoga throughout the West, also, Pattabhi Jois was the only one who had that many aspects of connecting breath and movement through vinyasa. It's quite a physical practice of moving up and down from the ground and is adaptable for many different people, but sometimes depending on the teacher or the way it's presented doesn't seem that way because there is some challenging movements in it and it's quite a demanding practice. Whereas Iyengar kind of brought this element of props and yoga therapeutics and making yoga approachable for all people. And, and it goes on from there because that's the lineage that I've studied. And then there's also different sects of yoga that have come from different perspectives as well. But that's the one that I study particularly. And I have interest in kind of combining them all together at this point and using a lot of props, but also using the breath flow and some other things.
So, as you alluded to, there is growing popularity of yoga in the Western Hemisphere, and with that has come a multitude of styles for novice yogis to choose from. How does someone decide if they want to try a hatha class over an Ashtanga practice or something on the more unique side, such as some of these like aerial yoga or things like that?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's kind of the thing is that things have diversified and westernized, and different forms of yoga come from different parts of India as well. So there's, lots of different tracks and lots of different reasons why a beginner particularly would study different kinds of yoga. Most people know of yoga to be hatha yoga, which is basically the umbrella for all postural yoga, so all moving forms of yoga. So Ashtanga yoga is Hatha yoga. So it can be kind of confusing to weed through some of the names for a practitioner. And then we also have styles of yoga like Yin Yoga that comes from a more Taoist perspective, which physically is meant for you to hold postures longer and remain cold and not move up and down, or not move so much at all, actually, and can be a more meditative practice, and also physically is meant to affect the deeper connective tissue and the nervous system in quite a profound way. So as far as someone finding yoga, I think the best way to come in at it is like personalized sort of feeling of like, what are you drawn to? So, I mean, another style of yoga is Kundalini Yoga, which maybe we can say has a more spiritual chanting, sort of an interesting way of doing postures where they're more moving and more energetic, that pushes you up to a point of will where you're just repeating one sort of movement with breath over and over again till you reach that point where you want to stop, and you kind of, you know, find the will inside to keep going. And that is a really interesting practice as well, but as you can see, so different. And then goat yoga, we have goat yoga. What else do we have? We have combination yoga of Yin Yoga mixed with Yang Yoga, which tends to mean like a more physical, moving variation of the practice, blended with that closer to the ground, quiet. And then if you're looking for like basically more of a de-stressing kind of yoga, which can, of course, be very, very profound with vascular health, and, you know, and reducing blood pressure and just all kinds of things, reducing blood sugar, reducing cholesterol. And, you know, so when you're healthy and you want to add that exercise element of it, Ashtanga and Vinyasa yoga can be very great. You know, and if you're more looking for that side of things to be more restorative, into more meditative aspects of it, looking for that stress reduction, you might be looking for a restorative practice with a lot of props, where again, you're not moving, but you're very comfortable most of the time and directed by your breath just to settle in and stretch lightly in the body. And Yin and Yoga Nidra are also practices like that. And then practices like goat yoga and well, even just like being in a class all together, when and if we can do that, is, you know, community building, and has elements of just making it fun and more, you know, diverse for more people to bring in different, you know, like different kinds of people to the practice to enjoy different elements of it. So those practices can be very fulfilling as well. And aerial yoga, I think, is again a very specific kind of yoga that, you know, all of these kinds of yoga, you'd want to find a very qualified teacher, but aerial yoga is, you know, based around a little bit more of a gymnastics appeal, and, you know, can be quite thrilling for people, because if you haven't done anything like that before, you can do little supported inversions and things like that, that where you're not weight bearing, obviously, as much. But yeah, I'd say that as a beginner coming to a practice, you want to look for a teacher within a style that speaks to you, because you want it to align and you want to be able to show up. So if you're looking for a little fun, maybe you go find an aerial class or a goat yoga class, and that might stem into a different kind of practice eventually. Or if you're looking to you know, maybe do a more spiritual minded practice, you know, that's like Kundalini Yoga with the chanting and the more energetic postures. Yin Yoga and restorative yoga are more that calming, you know, has a lot more maybe element of that rejuvenation and relaxation and meditation, and then more of an exercise and more movement and mobility, sometimes even like a dance, like moving with your breath with those vinyasa classes and Ashtanga classes. I personally like the blend. We're in the fusion land, I think, with a lot of things these days. And I think you can gain a lot from a practice that is maybe specifically going to take time to warm up the body in a very neutral mobility way, settle your energy with some breathing, moving a little bit more in the body, and coming down to a nice like finishing part of the practice where you focus on getting still and relaxing more. I think that's probably the place where people will gain the most benefit and more neutral, you know, look at those styles.
Absolutely. For me, I know with the pandemic and all that it's brought with us, one of the things I miss most about practicing in a studio is the hot classes. I really enjoy how it allows you to get deeper into the poses and just the added element of I guess, challenge that it adds. Can
Mhm.
you speak to what kind of benefits doing a hot class brings compared to, I guess, a regular or a cold class?
Sure. And it's a question I'm asked a lot. And I think that there's definite camps, just like the different styles of yoga, of people who love it, eat it up, and feel like they thrive in that environment. And then there's people who really feel awful, and also people who should avoid doing hot yoga, with certain conditions and chronic illnesses. But I think the thing too is that heat, obviously warms up the body, so it might feel like you can stretch deeper, which again has its positives and negatives. If you're a very tight person, this might like wake you up, your energy, you're working really hard, and you're creating like a total cleansing of your metabolism and your whole being, and it feels like you're really doing a great job, and you're feeling like maybe you have more accessibility to some of those postures. So the heat in general in certain kinds of practices is derived from the inside out. So there are kinds of practices where for many people it's a little bit redundant to have the extra heat from the outside and the heat from the inside. So sometimes you'll find more moderate classes in hot studios where they're not as pushing the vinyasa, which is like moving up and down from the ground and moving quickly and strong, forceful breaths, because you already got that heat from the outside. So it's a balance of both. But yeah, so I am not an avid hot practitioner. I've worked in a couple hot studios, and I am personally one of those people that are more relaxed in a cool room. And but again, there's that camp of people who really excel and love to death that style. So, I guess maybe that's just different when it's a totally different thing when you practice outside on a hot sunny day, because same thing, you're risking being, over sun exposure to get that same amount of heat, or you can't really in Calgary get that same amount of heat and humidity as you can in a studio. So I can see when people would really miss that it's not really replicable in another way apart from finding that internal heat in yourself, or I often will have just a light heater on in my room, especially in the winter months in Calgary, just so you feel more comfortable and relaxed. And like if you're stressed out because it's cold and your body is just moving against you, that won't make you want to come back for sure, right? So that's where it has its perks for sure.
Yeah, especially in the winter months around here, definitely. It's a nice reprieve from the cold weather.
Yeah,
You had
yeah,
mentioned that there
exactly.
are certain conditions that should avoid doing hot yoga. What are some of those conditions?
Well, definitely. I mean, I think the thing is that a lot of people come to yoga. Some people come very healthy, some people think they're very healthy, and some people have, undiagnosed chronic illness or are just starting to deal with their chronic illness. But there's inflammatory diseases that, you would want to avoid being in hot conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, if you've had a heart attack, or if you have high blood pressure. It wouldn't be the first place I would start. It wouldn't mean that you would be exempt from doing a hot class ever, right? But you'd want to discuss it with your doctor, and you'd want to make sure that you knew that you were in alignment with all the things that you need to take care of yourself. So some things like in inflammation, I know that there's different camps as well. Like um, chronic illnesses, like such as POTS would be a big one, where you've already got an extreme shape shifting of your circulatory system, that like one upping the heat will also encourage your metabolism to work harder too, and your heart to beat faster, right? So if there's like, if this is all, if you deal with high anxiety, it can to some degree help too. But again, it's like you just have to know how the heat affects you. So in yoga, there's this concept of Ayurveda, which is the sister science behind yoga, and it talks about three different constitutions, and one of them is Pitta, Vata, and Kapha. So they say that all of us are kind of within that frame of mind, or not frame of mind, but that personality of those three things. So just naturally, there are people that are hotter, right? Like more prone to being hot, more prone to exasperating their energy and being quite, firm and precise. And, like this is very simple way of talking about this, but just physically can also have more inflammation in their bodies, which they would not be the best people to do hot yoga. They also might be the ones more drawn to it, although because they, heat, and they want more heat to keep up with that, but it kind of fries them out at the same time. Whereas somebody who maybe is like more needs to get moving, and like that hot room, you're not really doing like up and down postures so much or as strong of a practice, so that could really get things going for them if they're more sluggish in their metabolism, right? And then there's the one in the middle is Vata, which is somebody you often think of someone who's quite wiry and like moves like the wind. Vata comes from the element of the wind, right? So both Vata and Kapha people can really relate to this. You can kind of take it into your own self if you're like really hot-headed and you always got to be go, 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 that, adding more heat or more strenuous yoga practice can kind of bring more of the same, and it'll be enjoyable for a while, but it'll just start to kind of burn you out over time. Whereas there's a balance to that too, which might mean just not doing it 5 days a week, right? It might mean like balancing your practice between doing one hot practice and doing a couple of other kinds of practices, like a yin practice, and even a balance within a Ashtanga class to get your kind of grouping of things. But yeah, so there is some work out there, especially with like if you'd had a heart attack or things like that. I would just definitely consult your doctor for any practice really, but especially with hot yoga.
No, that totally makes sense. I mean, realistically, you should be talking to your doctor before you start any new exercise routine because, like you said, you might have something that's undiagnosed or that you were unaware of.
Yeah.
But from a physiological standpoint, what are the effects of a regular yoga practice on the body?
Well, a regular yoga practice is really, firstly, I would say one of the most beautiful benefits, I think, is really the effects it has on the nervous system, which we're a multi-functioning integrated system, and as a whole our nervous system is going to be our manager of stress. So, and that's going to help us with our vascular health, with with our stress levels, with all kinds of chronic illnesses, and just basically how we deal in the world with anxiety and depression and that sort of thing. So it can really help to almost reset the nervous system, as that's a physical connection in our body, either, whether it's just from working hard, having stress in your body, or, living in a pandemic, all these things, so that the breath especially, and the yoga postures as you settle and get still, can bring your nervous system into a slower phase where you can, like move, well, your organs function better, where your circulatory system works better, where it basically is quite a profound chain of events that happens. But otherwise, I mean, apart from like improving flexibility and strength, there's weight bearing, so it increases your fitness level, your bone density level. It helps create awareness of yourself and around others. I think also mental and emotional balance, as it improves hormonal level, and things like blood glucose level, your respiratory function, your metabolism. I mean, I guess it goes on, and it also is a very good practice to help you balance the effects of mental illness, blood pressure issues, cholesterol issues. Like they're vast. They're vast. And I think
Yeah,
the
it's
kids,
quite a list.
yeah, it is quite a list, isn't it? And I mean, regular practice is what though for people, and like when I first came to Ashtanga Yoga, I was told you practice 6 days a week at at the crack of dawn, whatever that meant to you. Some people were there at 4 a.m., 6 a.m., whatever, in the morning without having eaten any food. And maybe, you go and you do your practice that way. And that's a dedicated practice, but for many, way too much, even physicality, if say you have a really physical job, right? It's like what's balanced? So people can still gain this benefit, definitely from regular practice, but for some regular practices once or twice a week, especially if that's consistent, that's a really beautiful, it still has some profound effects. And so it doesn't have to be that 6 days a week. And I think the information that we have now is that it's also exercise. And there's also different elements like riding your bike in the sunshine, where you take deep breaths in and out, like all these things balance in a similar way. And we can kind of shape shift our lives to choose the activities maybe blend a yoga practice in with those, or, sometimes I'm known for doing a bit of a yoga practice and then it leads me into a walk or a run, or vice versa. So there's lots of ways to gain benefit from that without having to think you have to do it 6 days a week, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Because especially, I mean, maybe right now it's a little easier with there being less activities to choose from as far as people filling their schedules, but in our quote unquote normal world, it can be challenging
Hmm.
sometimes to fit in a 75-minute practice every single day, right? Um,
Absolutely.
Another thing I was curious about is with more people practicing at home, as an instructor, how are you finding it with helping people do adjustments and especially beginners that are learning the postures and you want to ensure they're not hurting themselves by going too deep or not going into the position correctly? How are you finding that and how do you suggest newbies avoid injury?
Well, it's been a very interesting ride over the last year and a half or how long we've been in this. And I know lots of people were online and, maybe noting what their experience was much longer than, COVID times. But what it was new to me when, the studios started to close and I jumped online right away. And I was very used to walking around the room and placing hands on people and with permission, of course, and doing slight adjustments and reminders and coming right up to someone, and even saying just to them and not to the whole room, different elements of alignment to try and to stay safe, or bringing in a prop, right? And so online, what we came up against is, the learning curve was, okay, so, it's probably best to have a few props of your own, which now you can buy quite cheaply, even secondhand, like a bolster and a couple of blocks. And then you can also pull in chairs and your couch and like be creative. I sometimes do yoga in between a door frame where I can hold either side. I guess that's the thing, is like just not being afraid to go slow, to listen to your body, and to be able to like use those props and those modifications. So coming online, it's interesting because Zoom, for example, you have to turn off everyone's mic. So that's not a lot of question asking, except for the beginning and the end. But I find that those are very pivotal times to be there a little longer on the call for people, because you want to find a teacher that is, communicatable with, that doesn't just disengage or disappear. If, that's a good time to ask questions. And I think anybody that's teaching online yoga is very happy to spend the time doing that, or to talk more personally with people about how to modify. Because really, where there's a person, there's a modification. It's so important to know that yoga is not a generalized practice where you fit yourself into this shape that you see, but that more there are instructions that are guiding you to, yes, place your body in a certain way and look for those alignment cues that are important and pretty much generalized, but also guide you into a way of like doing a little bit at a time and feeling it out. So if it hurts, back away, right? And so I think what's beautiful about online yoga is it's really, maybe you can push a lot harder in a studio, which is, again, what people miss the most. And the community of being with other people really brings out that energy to work hard, and you feel all those endorphins going, right? But when you're at home, you're there by yourself, and it seems a little bit lacklustrous. But it's really, really good, in my opinion, because it's teaching us that a little goes a long way, and that this practice can be years of a journey in understanding, and it won't be the same year after year the more you practice. So start small, and start with a class that, is like, if you're really mentally like you need to move and you don't like to sit still for very long, and like approach it from that angle. Like, I know sometimes we think, well, I must sit, I must do a meditation class, and then the person goes crazy the entire time and doesn't want to come back. So it's like, hit it up from what it is that you are comfortable with and maybe what you're interested in. So if you're interested in more physical moving classes, look for somebody who has information, kinesthetic awareness and alignment, safety, and use your props. And don't think that you have to do it exactly the way the picture of the teacher is doing it, because then that's your only reference, right? What you're seeing is just the way the teacher's doing it. Or the idea of the picture of yoga. We're not trying to make shapes for yoga journal, right? We're in our own house. It's fairly casual. Maybe you're in your pajamas even. Make it about you and make it about, like, you can say, you know, like, I don't know what that is. I don't think I want to try it today. And listen to that. That's not like a cop out or you're not doing a good job. No one's going to judge you on a Zoom call, especially, you know, and it's like, just let it come slowly over time and you'll get hurt a lot less. I think also, like, often the hurts that come from yoga are from over striving and over pushing. And for example, something like a hamstring stretch, we feel the burn right away when we bend forward, because unless, you know, you do that in your life, you know, you're going to feel that stretch and things are tight in there. But also hamstrings need to be strengthened, often sometimes more than they need to be stretched. So, you know, we get into this deep stretch and we're like, okay, that's it, that burn, that's it. And like, if you're feeling that, back up. And my always thought is to say, think about the pose being about 5 to 8%.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice for sure. Um, Especially I think if this is your first kind of foray, it was one thing I really enjoyed about being in studio is, like you say, all those adjustments, because even if you've been doing it for a long time, there's always something new to learn, or your body might be tight because you did something new that week. So there's a number of studies that show yoga benefits many aspects of cardiovascular health, which you previously mentioned. Are there
Mhm.
specific poses that benefit the heart and vascular system that people should be incorporating into their practice if they're doing it on their own?
Yeah, I mean, you know, yoga originally was like a handful of postures, and then it's stated now that there's something like 7,000 postures. And then there's even more on top of that, because it's movement, it's exercise, it's stretching, it's fitness, it's spirituality, it's a lot of different things, right? But if we're specifically talking about heart health, again, it's going to be important to know, if you're a young individual just trying to prevent heart issues and be strong in your cardiovascular um, makeup, then it's different advice for versus somebody who maybe who's had a heart attack or has heart conditions or deals with something like a circulatory issue where maybe low blood pressure, or you know what I mean. So like the very generalized postures that are good for almost anyone in these situations are like, there's some simple breathing exercises, for example, Ujjayi pranayama, which is a very commonly known breathing exercise, which is used in Ashtanga, Vinyasa, and many other styles of yoga, where you're breathing in slowly through your nose. It's been likened to Darth Vader breath, where like that's a good approach to using that kind of a breathing while you're doing any postures. Standing postures, particularly, working on strength and building that, you know, sense of movement of your circulatory system and being strong to take yourself into the world. You know, postures like gentle forward folds and twists. There are some, we call them heart openers. Obviously, they're not opening the muscle of your heart, but they're like, there's a posture, for example, called a heart bed, where you place a block or a bolster beneath your shoulder blades and you just lay over it, which for, you know, for somebody who is tight in this area, or, you know, you imagine someone who's has a hard time breathing, or, you know, the look is like someone who is not confident, who rolls the shoulders, and it's not always pertaining to that, but that feeling of kind of coveting your heart area and sucking it in, which is a natural posture for a lot of people who sit right in a desk and like everything collapses around there. This shortens and clenches all the muscles that we breathe with. And when you lay back over that prop or block, or, you know, there's critical alignment prop called a black strap, even your pillow in your bed, right, where it just sort of lifts your chest a little bit. It's not an inversion. It's meant to stretch the muscles that we breathe with and create space all around the heart, so the circulation of the breathing and those muscles are releasing. So I'd say that'd be one of the biggest ones for heart health. And then side body stretches, where again, you're moving your body to create space into those breathing muscles, into those organs, as well as postures that create stamina. So creating stamina would be those standing postures, you know, neutral postures like those forward folds, some light back bends, as long as they're building strength in the back and not over stretching. And also, I think another big one, again, if your heart is healthy and your body is healthy, is if you could take one thing out of the yoga practice that encompasses a lot, and all those things basically, is sun salutation. So Surya Namaskara A, like you could look up on a YouTube video and get 5,000 hits on what that is, but a lot of vinyasa classes and hatha classes focus on that as a warm up or energizing the body. You don't have to do very many of them, but again, if you have low blood pressure or you have any other ailments, you may not be someone who's in the camp that goes up and down, lowering your heart below your hips and coming up kind of quickly. But it can be modified to go a little slower or to be adaptable. I'm practicing right now with one leg. So I know where there's a will, there's a way. So those are all very good, in the sense, good postures. Sun salutations obviously are going to increase the flow of your blood flow and increase oxygen coming into your body, and just be a little bit more cardiovascular work in general than other yoga practices.
Fantastic. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today. It has been an amazing conversation and definitely has me wanting to go practice again.
So if any of our listeners wanted to practice with you, how can they go about doing that?
Well, I am currently primarily online right now, and I am teaching via Zoom with another instructor friend of mine whose name is Natasha. And you can look up my website, which is integratedbodymindhealing.com. And I have a whole list of classes. We're going to start Monday with a new session of 5 weeks, which is fairly reasonable because it's for the intent of getting people through this hard times. And our classes are very diverse, focusing on strength and mobility and some classical yoga postures and practices, as well as very modernized movement and sort of nervous system approach to the practice. And after that, I'm hoping to get outside once that's allowed again and do some yoga in Canmore Park. And also the details to those classes are on my website as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again. I really appreciate it. And thank you to the listeners who tuned in to another episode of Supplementing Health.
Thank you for listening to Supplementing Health. For more information about our guests, past shows, and future topics, please visit aor.ca/podcast or aor.us/podcast. Do you have a topic you want us to cover? We invite you to engage with us on social media to request a future topic or email us at marketing